Okay, well, since this is our very first real episode, I thought I'd start out with something small. Like God. Stick with me for a second here. Do you remember the concept of the atom? This is something the Greeks came up with many, many years ago because they reasoned that if you took an object and you chopped it in half, and then chopped it in half again, and then again, and again, and again, and again, you would eventually come down to some elemental, fundamental building block of everything. That somehow the humans and the animals and the ground and the sky and the water all must be made up of something really, really small. Something they couldn't even hope to look at or study or anything, but they just had the idea. And that concept continued into modern days when scientists actually were able to find a fundamental building block of all of reality, or at least all of reality that we could study. And they called it the atom. Now, we know that really isn't true because they continued breaking that down, and they found that the atom was actually made up of smaller and smaller particles. You had the proton and you had the electron, and if it was an isotope, you also had the neutrons. And those particles were made up of even smaller and smaller and smaller fundamental particles. And now we have a concept which may or may not be true, but it's called the superstring. And what happens with the superstring is you have this infinitesimally small thread that we can't even hope to look at least not with modern technology. And it vibrates in, I believe it's now 11 different dimensions, if M theory is to be believed. And depending on the frequency of that vibration, that thread is either a proton or a neutron or a photon or a neutrino or a boson or a muon or a graviton, etc., etc., etc. And the truth is that that is really the atom, not what we call the atom, because atom really just refers to whatever the smallest thing is. And one day, if we're ever able to study a superstring, we'll probably wind up finding that it's made up of even smaller and smaller and smaller components. And that smaller component, whatever it is, will actually be the atom. Now, flip that concept over, and we have God. Because in reality, God is this huge, massive concept that's completely beyond our imagination. But take, for instance, the Western Christian. Now, even though our picture of God is really based on Michelangelo paintings, who wanted to picture God as something, and so he used old pictures of Zeus. And so we wind up with this image in our head of this old, fatherly, bearded man who loves us, and we can even see him in our minds kneeling down, shaping man from the clay. Well, we know this really isn't true. I mean, even if you took the most fundamentalist evangelical Christian and you set him down, you'd probably find out that he knows that it's a little more complicated than that. I mean, we know God isn't old. I mean, he's ageless, right? So why would he have a beard? And we know that God isn't really a man, even though, oddly enough, if you call him a woman, or heaven forbid, a goddess, people get really offended. And if you call him an it, oh, well, that's even worse. I mean, it is this horrible pronoun that means table or chair or lamp. So we wind up sticking with this he concept because Christians have to have something in their minds that they can actually relate to. And this fatherly figure really works better than imagining God as a whatever. Now, the Kabbalists have an interesting way of approaching this. Kabbalists are Jewish mystics who reasoned that there must be something beyond their Yahweh, Yahweh being the Hebrew single monotheistic God that many of us now think of as God. And they reasoned that there must be something beyond that, something beyond their imagination. After all, we're very, very limited in our imagination because our imagination is only slightly outside things that we can experience, things that we can see and taste and touch and smell. And so there had to be something beyond that. God had to be something outside everything that we could even imagine. And they called it the Ein Sof. Ein Sof simply means the endless, what the Gnostics call the source. This very, very abstract concept of whatever was outside, whatever was outside, whatever was outside our imagination. Now, the reason I bring all of this up is that this is the type of thing we need to remember when we run into people of other cultures and other religions, other people that might have a different term for their God. Because we really know that whatever we call God is really just another word. It's just another name, and we attribute things to him, even though we know that it's something big and outside our imagination. That thing that we have to relate to is just, like the Kabbalists say, an emanation of the Ein Sof. Now, we're going to have a lot more conversations about God because it is a pretty big concept. But I thought this might just be something we could start out with. Again, I'm the Urban Omnist, and I look forward to seeing you next time.